Recording in progress.
All right. Fantastic. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to this, which will be our 5th week on the book of Job. We're going to be spending probably about the first half or so of class, finishing up the handouts that we've been on for the last 3 weeks. And then we're going to jump forward in Job quite a bit as we shift our focus in the later part of the session. So for right now, we are on Job chapter 11. So last week, I'm pretty sure we spent all of last week on Job chapter 9 and Job chapter 10, which was Job's response kind of to his friend Bildad, what was said in chapter 8, but also Job beginning to wonder out loud, beginning to question the nature of God. We looked in chapter 9, Job wishing that he could be able to dispute with God, Job wishing that it were possible for him to be able to talk to God, to have a one-on-one conversation with God, to be able to question God and maybe have God answer him of why he's being punished, why he is being tormented and suffering when Job thinks that he did nothing to deserve this. And that comes back at the end of the chapter when Job starts talking about some kind of language that we might think of as a courtroom, of Job wishing someone to mediate between the two of them, where Job could air his grievances against God and not fear retribution. At the same time, we also looked in the middle of Job chapter 9 in Job's Lamentations. Job was starting to maybe question whether or not God is fully good. Job saying things like God has already decided Job guilty whether or not he is good, and saying things along the lines of God punishes even those who are blameless and mocks despair. So kind of Job beginning to wrestle with his own understanding of God, wrestling with the idea that maybe is God even good? And we looked into that, and that's when we talked a bit about theodicy, those questions of theodicy. Again, those are really just a tool that we looked at to help us maybe understand certain aspects of what is happening with Job, tools that maybe can be useful or maybe not be useful. Just depends on how we want to read Job. And yeah, that is what we all did last week. Anyone have any questions, lingering thoughts, or clarifications on what we did last week before we move forward? All right, so we are going to start by digging into Job chapter 11. So we've talked throughout the course of the last few weeks, the dialogue cycle in the book of Job, this going back and forth between Job and Eliphaz, then Job and his friend Bildad, now finally Job and his last friend Zophar. Following in the wisdom tradition, Eliphaz, the oldest friend, the wisest, they were the one that spoke first. Then we had Bildad. Now we have Zophar, who, if we're following the wisdom tradition, would be the youngest of Job's 3 friends, would be the least wise. It's why he is the last one to speak. So Zophar is the least distinct of the 3 friends, and his dialogue is kind of the least, he has the least things to say that we haven't already heard before. A lot of the things that Zophar says are things that we've already maybe heard or are similar to some of the thoughts posed by the other friends. The interesting thing about Zophar that we're going to see once we start reading through chapter 11 is that Zophar's understanding is a lot more black and white than any of the other friends or even Job. One of the things that we've talked a lot about, that I've mentioned week in and week out, is this idea that Job is kind of at times seeming to toe a line between what we might consider faithfulness and what we might consider overstepping the bounds of what it means to be faithful. It's very much a gray area of faith. When we look at Job's first friend, Eliphaz, he's got a little bit less gray area than Job. He will rebuke Job and say, hey, Job, maybe you shouldn't be saying the things you're saying, but he doesn't really go much further than that. When we start getting into Zophar here in this first section, we're going to see with Zophar's language that he is a lot more cut and dry and a lot more black and white in his understanding than any of the other friends. And he comes across as rather blunt, to put it lightly. I'm going to go reverse order on my screen this week. So Carol, could you start off the first reading for us, please? Could you find Job chapter 11 and read verses 1 through 6 for us, please?
Got to unmute, I'm sorry. Then Zophar the Amathite answered, should a multitude of words go unanswered? And should one full of talk be vindicated? Should your babble put others to silence? And then when you mock, shall no one shame you? For you say, my conduct is pure, and I am clean in God's sight. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you, and that he would tell you of the secrets of wisdom. For wisdom is many-sided. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves.
All right, thank you, Carol. So yeah, Zophar comes right out and says it in the first couple verses right there. Are you thinking that you should be vindicated? Is no one going to rebuke you when you mock? Now, here's the thought. If Zophar thinks that Job is mocking, who is Job mocking according to Zophar? Who does Zophar think Job is doing this to? Anyone have any thoughts, any guesses?
I'm guessing God.
Is it God? Yeah. Yeah. So, like I said earlier, with the gray area, we had the friends. When Eliphaz first spoke, he said to Job, look, you're being punished because you did something wrong. I know that you think you did something right, and you aren't deserving of this, but that's not really what's going on. It's not really much of a rebuke. Then when we got to Bildad said a bit more like, what's happening is because you did something wrong, or maybe someone close to you did something wrong, you need to repent. Zophar is a lot more blunt in his response. He just comes out and says, you need to be rebuked because you are mocking God. You do not deserve to be vindicated because what you're saying is completely wrong. You're saying that you're good. You're saying that you're pure in God's sight. How I wish God would speak to you and show you how wrong you are. So unlike the other friends who kind of just bring their counsel and their words from their own understanding, their own wisdom, Zophar seems almost kind of like he is wishing for God to appear to properly put Job in his place, because he just believes that Job is so completely wrong. And he even takes this an extra step when it comes to talking about Job's sin. Again, if we look at the other friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, what's happening now is you're being punished for sin. If you repent, it will end. And Zophar, the very end of verse 6, Zophar kind of tells Job that you're suffering now, but it's less than what you deserve. Zophar isn't going to be like Eliphaz or Bildad and say, you're suffering maybe because God's trying to correct you, maybe God is trying to teach you something. Zophar is telling Job, you're being punished because you're bad. You should be thankful it's not worse. So a little bit more blunt than either of the other two friends so far, yeah.
But he assumes that Job is guilty. What Job guilty of? You know, he has doubts. So don't we all have doubts in our Christian life? I mean, he's in distress. He gets a pass for that. But even when we're not in distress, we question, God, are you listening to me? Are you in charge of the universe? What's guilty about that?
Yeah, and this kind of hits at one of the frustrations that Job has with his friends, and one of kind of the problems of the friends that we have as the readers is that all three of Job's friends are hounding him that he's being punished for doing something wrong. Clearly, he's guilty of something, but none of the friends can really seem to agree or lay out any convincing arguments of what Job has done that's made him guilty, what he's done that's deserving of punishment. Zophar is kind of hinting at it in the first couple verses of chapter 11. Maybe he's suggesting that Job is mocking God and that's why he's being punished, but that would be something Job's doing now, not really what caused it in the first place. So yeah, what you're hitting on right there is the main frustration that Job is having with his friends, and kind of the same frustration Job is having with God, that this seems to be a punishment that he's receiving for doing wrong, but no one can tell Job what it is that he did wrong. So yeah, what you're hitting on right there, Nick, is the exact frustration that Job is having throughout this entire exercise.
I don't know that you necessarily need to read what Zophar says there as, you know, you ought to feel lucky you're not getting it worse. I wonder if Zophar, in the tradition of so much of the Old Testament, understands that God is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. I read that as Zophar saying more along the lines of, you deserve worse than you are getting. And, thank God we have a God who is filled with grace and you are not getting what you deserve. So, I mean, I don't have a ton of context one way or the other to say which is, kind of faithful to the rest of Zophar's testimony, but I read more grace into that than maybe other folks might have.
And even with the more graceful reading, even with that kind of angle on it, Zophar is still kind of saying to Job, it could be worse, and it should be. There is almost still kind of a sense of, buddy, you better be thankful that things aren't worse, because they could be. Which, the first two friends, they weren't very sympathetic to Job, and Zophar basically going, hey, it could be worse, at least it's not. That's kind of even a little more of an extreme reaction to what Job has been going through. So, but yeah. Okay. I don't know if Mark has his microphone fixed or not. I'll just skip you, Mark. We'll go to our next reader. And if you feel compelled to read later and your microphone allows you, then we can come back later. So I'm going to go to Jennifer. Could you take the next section, still Job chapter 11, verses 7 through 12, please?
Can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? It is higher than heaven. What can you do? Deeper than Sheol. What can you know? its measure is longer than the earth and broader than the sea. If he passes through and imprisons and assembles for judgment, who can hinder him? For he knows those who are worthless. When he sees inequity, will he not consider it? But a stupid person will get understanding when a wild ass is born human.
Well, now I know why some people thought the earth was flat. Because when it says its measure is longer than the earth, that would be like a flat surface. Just throwing that out there.
I thought you, when you said that, you were referencing verse 12, where a stupid person will gain understanding when a wild ass is born human, but sure, we'll go with that.
I guess
too.
that could work too.
Yeah. So once again, we have Zophar responding to Job in a manner that is similar to the other two friends. Eliphaz and Bildad, both, when they were responding to Job, they said, hey, what you're saying is wrong. God can't do anything wrong. You're the one that's in the wrong. You need to repent. Once again, Zophar is the friend who's taking this a step further. Can you possibly fathom God? Of course you can't. You are witless. You are stupid. Compared to God, you know nothing. And the reason that you don't understand what's happening is because you know nothing. Because when a wild ass is born human, which I don't think will ever happen, that's when you will have the understanding to grasp what's going on here. So on the one hand, Zophar's response to Job so far hasn't really said anything new, because with how much time we spent going through the first two friends, I don't think he's really said anything new, anything that to any of us is like, that's something that hasn't been said before. But at the same time, he seems to be a lot more blunt in his response. He seems to be like that, the third impatient friend, okay, the other two guys tried, they're not getting through to Job, I'm just gonna be blunt, this is what's going on. But as far as things that a friend would say, Zophar doesn't seem like he's the best friend. Just want to throw that out there too. I don't know how everyone is with their own personal friends and friend groups, but I would like to think that none of us have friends where if we're facing great suffering and calamity to the point that we wish we were dead, I don't think any of us would have a friend that would come up to us and say, hey, you just don't understand what's going on because you're not smart. I would hope that none of us have friends that would say something like that.
We like honest friends, just not that honest.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Kim. So, but yeah. So Zophar is very much black and white. He is saying basically the same things that the other two friends did, but he is doing it in a much more brutally honest way. He's not really giving Job any slack, any leeway. So now that we've read what he says when he's rebuking Job and trying to tell Job what's really going on, keeping in mind the fact that he's being a lot more blunt than everyone else, now let's hear what Zophar has to say when he gets to the part where he tries to console Job or say something to uplift him. So that would be Nick. Could you start at chapter 11, verse 13 and read the rest of the chapter? And before you start, Renee, could you look up for us Psalm chapter 73, please? Because we're also going to need that in a few short moments here.
Zach, I'm
okay.
sorry, I did not hear what you said.
Can you look up Psalm chapter 73 for us, please? And then Nick, when you are ready, could you please do that Job reading for us?
If you direct your heart rightly, you will stretch out your hands toward him. If iniquity is in your hand, put it far away. Do not let wickedness reside in your tents. Surely then you will lift up your face without blemish. You will be secure and will not fear. You will regret your misery, but will remember it as waters have passed away. As waters that have passed away. And your life will be brighter than the noonday. Its darkness will be like the morning. And you will have confidence because there is hope. You will be protected and take your rest in safety. You will lie down and no one will make you afraid. Many will entreat your favor, but the eyes of the wicked will fail. All the way of escape will be lost to them, and their hope is to breathe their last.
All right. Thank you, Nick. If we just go with this passage, Zophar sounds like a much better friend. I mean, if what Zophar is saying is true, that sounds like a pretty good deal. The suffering is over. Iniquity is far away from us. Wickedness does not come near. We are without blemish. We're without fear. We even forget our misery. And life will just be bright and hopeful. We will be protected from all harm. And the eyes of the wicked will fail and they will be gone from us. This sounds wonderful. This sounds great. It's not sounding, though, like it's something that's really real. It almost kind of sounds too good to be true, in a
Well,
sense.
he's making it conditional. He says, if you direct your heart rightly,
Mm-hmm.
So he's almost saying like, if you're as wonderful as me, then all of this sort of thing will come to pass.
If you're as wonderful as me, that's I didn't think of it that way, but I could see Zophar kind of playing that card. Yeah, I could see Zophar maybe trying to play that card here. Yeah, if you're as good as you say you are, if you're as good as me even, then all of these things will happen. So I just want to draw our attention again to Psalms, because we've been doing a lot of comparison between Job and Psalm over the course of this Bible study. So I want to do another one. And this is why, Renee, I had you find Psalm 73 for us. Do you have that?
Psalm 73, yes.
All right. Can you read verses 1 through 3?
Good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold. For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked.
Okay. So Psalm 73, you've got the writer talking about how their feet almost slipped, how they almost went away from God, went down the wrong path because they envied others. They see other people prospering and they're like, man, I wish I had some of that. Okay. So that's what we're working with. Renee, can you read now verse 13 and 14 of that same chapter?
In vain I have kept my heart pure and have washed my hands in innocence. All day long I have been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments.
All right, thank you. So we have Job, who, according to his friends, is being punished by God because he did something wrong. And according to Zophar, as we just read, if Job directs his heart rightly, whether that means Job to be as good as he claims to be as good as Zophar, or what have you, if Job simply does that, all of these wonderful things will happen. He will have no iniquity. He will never be miserable. He will forget his sufferings. He will forget his troubles. He will be safe. He will be protected. He will have nothing but hope in his life. And then let's compare that to the psalmist, who in the beginning of the chapter was talking about how it was hard to keep the faith at some points. They envied those who were prosperous, but they kept the right path. And in verses 13 and 14, in vain I have kept my heart pure. All day long I'm afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments. So we have Zophar painting this picture that's almost too good to be true of Job is just better in his faith. Life is going to be kind of hunky-dory, kind of perfect. And then we have the psalmist bringing us back to reality that even when life is good, even when one is pure and upright, there is still suffering in the world. There are still afflictions. It kind of speaks against what Zophar is saying. It kind of invalidates a bit of what Zophar is trying to say to Job. So just another connection I wanted to bring up there and throw out there, see if anyone has any thoughts on. All right. And with that, we have finished chapter 11, and we have finally finished with the second handout for our Bible study that was sent out, I think, a month and a half ago at this point. Okay. So now we're going to turn our handouts to the ones that got sent out on Monday, and in our Bibles, we're going to turn all the way to Job chapter 32. We're going to skip ahead just a little bit. For those who want to do more reading of Job on their own time, the handout that we've been in since early December, I think, first page has got that nice little table talking about the dialogue cycles, showing these splits and who's talking in what chapter, laying out the structure of Job. Feel free to use that. Feel free to look into the second and third dialogue cycles. We're skipping over them because a lot of stuff in there is repetitive in nature. There's not a lot of things that are super new there, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing there at all. It's just for the sake of actually finishing Job at some point, we're gonna skip ahead a few chapters. Okay. So now we're in Job chapter 32. And I just want, I would like it if Kim, I know that this isn't on the handout, but Kim, could you read the first 4 verses of chapter 32?
Verse 4? Oh, sure.
Yeah, the first 4 verses.
So these 3 men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then Elihu, son of Barashel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, became angry. He was angry at Job because he justified himself rather than God. He was angry also at Job's 3 friends because they had found no answer, though they had declared Job to be in the wrong. Now Elihu had waited to speak to Job because they were older than he. But when Elihu or whatever saw that there was no answer in the mouths of these 3 men, he became angry.
All right, thank you. So we have this person named, I don't know if it's Elihu or Elihu, or I'm not sure how it's technically pronounced. I said Elihu all of this morning, so I'm just going to go with that for the sake of
Eli.
Eli, sure. I'll go with Elihu. If we go all the way back to chapter 2, where Job faces all of this suffering and has everything taken away from him. Verse 11 of chapter 2. Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, heard about the troubles that came upon him. They set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and comfort him. So we had in the first two chapters, we have Job, we have his friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And from chapter 3 until chapter 31, it's just those four guys having a conversation. Now, all of a sudden, in chapter 2, there's this, chapter 32, now all of a sudden there's this other character named Elihu, who apparently was there the entire time and has been listening to all of them talk the entire time. Where did Elihu come from? Why was Elihu never mentioned before this point? I don't really know. It's not the important part here, but it is a question that's always bothered me. But yeah, as Kim read, Elihu is much younger than everyone else involved. And after sitting there for all this time, after listening to Job talk, after listening to the friends talk, he's mad at Job because Job thinks that he is upright and righteous. And he's mad at the friends because they were unable to convince Job that he was wrong. So finally, after all this talking, after everyone else is done, Elihu's like, you know what? I'm done sitting here watching. I'm getting angry. I can't stand this anymore. It's my turn to speak. I'm going to speak my mind, and I'm going to put everyone in their place. Oh, and I think I just accidentally got a little bit ahead of myself. Oh, well. Pastor Eric, could you take chapter 32, verses 6 through 9, and introduce us to what Elihu's first choice of words are to these other friends?
Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, answered, I am young in years, and you are aged. Therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. I said, let days speak, and many years teach wisdom. But truly, it is the spirit in a mortal, the breath of the Almighty that makes for understanding. It is not the old that are wise, nor the aged that understand what is right. Therefore I say, listen to me, and let me also declare my opinion.
And then Pastor Eric, since I've got you, can you also do verses 17 through 21, please?
Sure. I will also give my answer. I will declare my opinion. For I am full of words. The spirit within me constrains me. My heart is indeed like wine that has no vent, like new wineskins, it is ready to burst. I must speak so that I may find relief. I must open my lips in answers. I will not show partiality to any person or use flattery toward anyone.
All right.
So the footnote in the study guide I have for verse 32, verse 2, chapter 32, verse 2. This is the Revised Standard Version. It says Elihu has impeccable credentials. According to Genesis 22:21, he was the son of Abraham's brother Nahor. Furthermore, in Hebrew, the name Barashal means El blesses or blessel, and Elihu means he is my God. Elihu actually quotes earlier speeches. So, I was reading ahead a little bit earlier. It doesn't seem like Elihu speaks anything bad. He praises God's wisdom. So knowing, this is my just inference, knowing whether the Job could be a real story or not, the fact that you draw Elihu now, is this an allegorical reference by the author?
It could be. I'm not fully sure about that. I'm not really sure about that. The relation to Abraham just happens to be because the fact that Elihu's the son of a Buzite, however you would say that. I'm not sure if this is an allegory by the author. I'm not sure if Elihu is meant to have some kind of special connection to God. You can definitely argue that because Elihu's speech ends in chapter 37, and literally the moment he stops speaking, God appears on the scene and begins talking. And if we listen to what Elihu says, he definitely himself thinks that he's full of the Spirit of God, and that's where his wisdom comes from. He made that quite plain when he said that I thought age made people wise, but now I realize that that's not true. I'm going to put everyone in their place. I'm not fully
Remember that
sure.
verse for your ordination.
What?
What's that?
Remember that verse for your ordination.
Yeah. I can't remember who, but someone in the morning session said, Elihu sounds like an arrogant 25-year-old. And I said, well, good thing I'm 26 then. So yeah, Elihu's been, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, my guess is it's likely not allegorical, and I'm basing that guess on the idea that that was a much more popular way of understanding texts later in biblical times, particularly early interpreters of the New Testament. But maybe more convincing to me is I don't think there's any other allegorical content in Job, nothing that's kind of given, I'm going to tell one story, but to really understand it, you have to correspond character A with someone else, character B with someone else, and so on. So I haven't seen any allegory in anything we've read so far. And so just to plunk that in the middle seems a little unusual to me. So that's my thought is this is just kind of who the guy happens to be. That's my guess.
I also noticed in going along with what Nick was saying in my Bible, it mentions that Ram, which is the family, is also the name of one of David's ancestors. So that then, in the ongoing discussion of when Job was written, there was some discussion before that Job may have made use of some Psalms, but if Ram is the name of one of David's ancestors, then that would throw that argument out the window and make it seem that Job is much older than and not written after the Psalms, which was one of our discussion points, just as a fun or not so fun fact.
Mine also says that they think that this section could have been added later to the original book of Job.
I mean, that could potentially be an explanation as to why this Elihu character kind of just magically appears, because clearly wasn't there in the beginning or wasn't stated to be there in the beginning. For our purposes, not super important, but yeah, still interesting things to throw around, interesting things to talk about. So yeah, we heard what Elihu has to say, him explaining why he's speaking at this point and why he's finally talking. We heard his declaration that it is the spirit of a person, the breath of God that gives them understanding, not necessarily age. And Elihu seems like he's ready to put Job, ready to put the three friends, ready to put all of them right in their place. And he's got some great wisdom that he's going to impart on everyone. So why don't we read about what he has to say and see what we think about it. Tom, I realized that I skipped you in the reading accidentally, I think. So you can take this next section if you're willing. Chapter 33, verses 12 through 22. This is Elihu speaking directly to Job in chapter 33. And this section kind of summarizes most of what he's saying without reading the whole chapter. I tried to get the meat of his argument, so to speak.
But in this you are not right. I will answer you. God is greater than any mortal. Why do you contend against him, saying, he will answer none of my words? For God speaks in one way, and in two, though people do not perceive it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on mortals while they slumber on their beds, then he opens their ears and terrifies them with warnings, and he may turn them aside from their deeds and keep them from pride, to spare their souls from the pit, their lives from traversing the river. They are also chastened with pain upon their beds, and with continual strife in their bones, so that their lives loathe bread, and their appetites dainty food. Their flesh is so wasted away that it cannot be seen, and their bones, once invisible, now stick out. Their soul draws near the pit, and their lives to those who bring death.
All right, thank you, Tom. So Elihu's made it clear before he starts speaking. He's the wise one here. They all need to listen to him. He also made it clear he's not going to flatter anyone. He's not gonna play nice. He's gonna say what is on his mind. He's gonna tell it the way it is. And what he's saying to Job here, what does it really come down to? If you were to condense that entire section down to one point, to one sentence, what is really at the heart of what Elihu is saying here?
Who are you to question God?
Who are you to question God? Yep, that is one part of it, which Elihu, that's not really any different than what Job's three friends have been saying. It's not much difference than what the other three friends have been saying. What's the other key thing going on here?
Do you know the full dimensions of God?
Okay, yeah. Do you know the full dimensions of God? What is Elihu saying God does? What is Elihu saying God does to people, and why? In verse 14, Elihu says what God does, and in verse 17, he tells why God does it.
He speaks in one way.
God speaks to people for what purpose?
Them going to hell,
Sorry, what was it?
to keep them from going to hell.
Yeah, to turn them away from wrongdoing, to make them behave properly. Yeah, very good. So Elihu made a big deal about how he's the wise one here. He knows what's going on. He's going to put everyone in their place. And what he has to say boils down to, number one, Job, who are you to question God? Which, again, every one of the friends already said that to Job. And the second thing he has to say is, God speaks to people so that they don't do bad things. How exactly is this a new type of wisdom that's meant to put Job and the other friends in their place? Because I'm looking at this, I'm reading this. Job is upset, yes, that it seems like God's not answering him. But the reason Job is upset is because Job is asking God, why am I suffering? What did I do to deserve this? And Elihu's answer to Job's questions is, hey, Job, did you know God talks to people so that they don't do bad things? Doesn't really seem like an answer to what Job is struggling with.
At least not yet, because God hasn't answered him in person yet.
Yeah. If we're going with the reading that Elihu is filled with the Spirit of God, his wisdom's coming from God, then yeah, it doesn't answer Job's question because God isn't here yet. In terms of just what Elihu is saying, though, does this really add anything so far to the conversation that has been going on now for 29 chapters?
I thought it might add a little something in that the other friends were just saying, you know, I'm trying to think of a nice word. You're a bad person. How's that? You're a bad person and you're getting what you deserve. But here, Elihu is saying, yes, you may be a bad person, but God is doing this to perhaps make you see the light.
All right. Well, let's go with that. Let's say that Elihu's big enlightened wisdom to Job is that God is doing this so that you can see the light. God is, excuse me, God is trying to do this to lead you back to the path of what is right.
Try saying that now to a person who's suffering.
Yeah. Not only try saying that to someone who's suffering, but also that's the same thing Eliphaz says to Job in chapter 5. In the end of Eliphaz's advice to Job, remember he was the first friend to talk. Eliphaz says, hey, Job, people that get punished by God are being corrected so that they can do better. You should be thankful God's correcting you. So again, I ask, Eliphaz, who propped himself up, made it sound like he was going to drop some big wisdom on everyone. Is he really adding anything to the conversation yet? Or is it kind of a recap at this point of some of the things we've already heard 2, 3, 4 times from the other friends?
I'd say no if you rebuked what I said, which you kind of did politely, then I would say no, they're not adding anything.
I like what he says in verse 12, but in this you are right. I will answer you. God is greater than any mortal will do you. Why do you contend against him? He will answer none of my words. Why does Job say he'll answer none of my words? I got it underlined in my Bible, so for that reason.
Yeah. And I think the reason for that, and again, I'm not a super uber authority on this stuff, but to me, it once again kind of shows the dissonance between what Job is saying and what his friends are hearing or what his friends are advising him on. Because Job is upset that Job is asking God why he's suffering and doesn't feel like he's getting an answer. And Elihu's response to Job is accusing God of not talking to people, which if Elihu is telling Job God talks to people, I can only imagine Job's response being like, well, yeah, I know God talks to people. That's why I'm upset, because God isn't telling me the answer to this question. So I'm not 100% sure on this, but from whatever angle I look at it, it feels like Elihu isn't bringing, at this point, any great wisdom to the table and really adding anything to the dialogue yet. Oh, wrong document. Okay. So that was Elihu talking to Job in chapter 33. So then in chapter 34, Elihu shifts his attention to the other three friends, to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. So let's maybe hear what Elihu has to say to the three friends. Maybe now that Elihu is speaking to the three friends, and as he clearly stated in chapter 32, he has true wisdom because of the Spirit of God in him, and they don't despite their years. Maybe Elihu is going to drop some kind of wisdom on the three friends, show them the error of their ways. So Carol, could you take chapter 34, verses 10 through 15, please?
Therefore hear me, you who have sense. Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong. For according to their deeds he will repay them, and according to their ways he will make it befall them. Of a truth, God will not do wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. Who can give him charge over the earth, and who laid on him the whole world? If he should take back his spirit to himself and gather to himself his breath, all flesh would perish together, and all mortals return to dust.
All right, thank you. So I know that we haven't read all of chapter 34. I know that there's another section coming up in chapter 34. So this is just a snippet of what Elihu is saying to the other three friends. It's not his full response. But I just want to point out again, Job's three friends, all three of them in their responses to Job, a common thing that all of them said was, Job, you're being punished for something you did wrong. If you think that you didn't do anything wrong, you're the one who's wrong, because God is great. God is always just. God can do no wrong. And here we have Elihu, who in his wisdom, speaking to the friends, telling them how it is, because if we remember, he's also mad at them and wants to tell them what's really going on, put them in their place. And so far his wisdom to them is, hey, you three, listen to me. Does God do anything wrong? Of course not. God is just. What's the point of all of this? What does this add? What does Elihu really accomplish with any of this? Is he really accomplishing anything right now?
Yeah, I mean, this might be kind of far off, but like, you know how it's kind of like, what have you done for me lately thing, where it's like maybe his words will be what Job may listen to, or he thinks will listen to, because he was the one that was the last one to talk to him about this. And it's like, you know, he's repeating it, but really, you know, Job's going to remember the most recent thing it was told to him, possibly.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
Jennifer, could you take our next passage? So we're still in chapter 34. So we're going to skip to verses 31 through 37.
For has anyone said to God, I have endured punishment, I will not offend any more. Teach me what I do not see. If I have done iniquity, I will do it no more. Will he then pay back to suit you because you rejected? For you must choose and not I. Therefore declare what you know. Those who have sense will say to me, and the wise who will hear who hear me will say, Job speaks without knowledge. His words are without insight. Would that Job were tried to the limit because his answers are those of the wicked? For he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hands among us and multiplies his words against God.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. So the conclusion of Elihu's words, his big speech to the friends, the big speech that he knows better than everyone else, the big speech that's going to put the friends in their place, show them what's really going on. And it's repeating the same condemnation of Job that all three of the friends already did in each of their respective dialogues. He even in verse 34, he's calling upon them, upon those who are wise and have sense, to join him in his rebuking of Job and calling on Job to be tested for being wicked and sinful. Again, forgive me, but I'm just not seeing where this wisdom is. I'm not seeing where Elihu believes himself to be a big earth-shattering revelation or big contribution to the conversation at this point. But what are some thoughts other people have about what's going on, what's being said right now?
I would tend to agree with you, and I guess one could say, somebody could characterize Elihu as the first of the great ancient blowhards, or the bag of winds, something like that. There's really nothing there.
Mm-hmm. And
could have been a politician.
Wow. And while that is easy to say, and while at this point, we're looking at Elihu, we're reading his arguments, and he doesn't really seem like he's adding anything. We have to remember in chapter 32, Elihu described himself, the spirit of the Almighty is within me. That's why I'm wiser than the rest of you. Kind of not in a big rush to condemn someone who says that thing, but again, is there anything to that, or is he just trying to say that to bolster his, since you used the word politician, bolster his approval rating among the friends and try to get them to listen to him? Maybe. I don't know. And anyone else have any thoughts right now? Okay. So far through chapters 32, 33, and 34, Elihu hasn't really added anything to the conversation. He hasn't really said anything that is new. He's kind of recapped a lot of the arguments that other people have made, okay? Now when we get into chapter 35, Elihu's going to start saying some things that are new. And some of these things that he's going to say, when we compare to what's been going on for all the rest of Book of Job up to this point, they're kind of out of left field, and they kind of don't really go with what the text and the author has been building up to this point in the Book of Job. I'm going to take this section because I haven't read yet, and I really find this section interesting. So this is chapter 35, verses 1 through 8. Then Elihu said, "Do you think this is just? You say, I am in the right, not God. Yet you ask him, what profit is it to me, and what do I gain by not sinning? I would like to reply to you and to your friends with you. Look up at the heavens and see, gaze at the clouds so high above you. If you sin, how does that affect him? If your sins are many, what does that do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness only affects humans like yourself, and your righteousness only other people. Aha. That is certainly something new. What do we think? What do we think about that idea?
He's saying that God doesn't care.
Yeah, not only does God not care whether we sin or are righteous, but it doesn't affect God. It doesn't matter to God. It's an interesting perspective. Sorry, go ahead.
It doesn't diminish God. That's what I was trying to say.
It doesn't diminish God. Say more about that.
Well, our sins do not diminish God. God is still great.
But on the flip side, Elihu is also saying, if you're righteous, it doesn't give anything to God. And is it not common teaching that our righteousness, our good works, give glory to God, give honor to God? And here Elihu sounds like he's suggesting God is so far above us, God is so far removed from anything that nothing you do affects God, whether you're a good person or a bad person, whether you're righteous or sinful, it doesn't matter, doesn't affect God. God doesn't really seem to care.
We're always taught that he does care and that he basically, sheds a tear over how we are and what we do. So I don't know if it's just his way of just making Job feel like you're no different than just one little grain of sand on a beach. You're not as important as you think you are, kind of thing.
Yeah. Maybe that's what Elihu's trying to do here. If it is what Elihu's trying to say, I don't think he said it the best way that he possibly could have. Because the way that Elihu said it, let's just say it can be problematic. The obvious question for Elihu is, if our doing goodness doesn't give anything to God, if our sinning doesn't affect God, why would God punish people for their sins? So with the introduction of Elihu in chapter 32, we've done a big tonal shift in the book of Job. And this is kind of why there is that one belief in scholarship that Elihu was a later addition. Because wisdom tradition is an individual with an experience, and either God or wise men helping that person understand their experience and learn about God. And Elihu has kind of come in with a completely different outlook, that age does not bring wisdom, that God is not affected by anything humans do, and God is so far removed that God could not care less. But Elihu's also trying to maintain that the reason Job is suffering and doing all these things is because he did something wrong against God. So it's a bit of an interesting, confusing mesh of things that we're getting out of Elihu. He wants to say that Job's sin doesn't affect God, that it only affects other humans, but he still also wants to maintain that, yes, Job, you're wrong, you're sinful, you're being punished by God for this. It's a bit confusing. And that second passage that I have in chapter 35, that's basically just Elihu going back to talking to Job about why God isn't answering him. Elihu talks about how the reason God is not answering Job. Well, okay, I'll have someone read it instead of just explain the whole thing. Nick, could you read chapter 35, verses 9 through 16, please?
Because of the multitude of oppressions, people cry out, they will call for help because of the arm of the mighty. But no one says, where is God, my maker, who gives strength in the night, who teaches us more than the animals of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the air. They may cry out, but he does not answer because of the pride of evildoers. Surely God does not hear an empty cry, nor does the Almighty regard it. How much less when you say that you do not see him, that the case is before him and you are waiting for him. And now because his anger does not punish and it does not greatly heed transgression, Job opens his mouth in empty talk. He multiplies words without knowledge.
All right. So again, the first half of chapter 35, Elihu wants to maintain that sin and wickedness don't affect God, they only affect other humans. But then at the same time, he also wants to maintain that the reason God isn't answering Job when Job is crying out is because Job is wicked, is because Job is arrogant. And it's that same wickedness and arrogance that has caused him to suffer at the hand of God as punishment.
It's really a great saying in verse 16, something you might have to remember if you're arguing with somebody. You multiply words without knowledge.
Yeah, that's a pretty good takeaway. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Does that go back to the politicians again, Tom?
I don't know, but it's a very clever saying.
It is. That it is. Yeah.
You know, Elihu started out pretty good in chapter 32. He's getting worse and worse as we read more chapters here.
Yeah.
I think there's the turnaround coming in chapter 36 because the title says Elihu exalts God's goodness.
Mm-hmm. Well, Elihu does he does start to turn it around, and most of chapter 37, and to speak on what Nick said about Elihu turning things around, and to mention something that I talked about earlier, most of chapter 37 is Elihu praising God for God's wonderful power and reminding Job and everyone else that no one is able to stand before God or answer God. That's the end of chapter 37. Elihu praising God for his power and wonder and saying no one can stand against God or answer God. Then in chapter 38, God arrives in God's wonder and splendor and tells Job, hey, I'm going to question you. Try to answer me. So yes, by the end, Elihu does turn it around, and chapter 37 is literally kind of an introduction to God, kind of leading God into the scene. For now, we're still kind of stuck in the muck that is Elihu. And I don't have this verse in in one of the sections on the handout. Chapter 36, verse 4. Truly my words are not false. One who is perfect in knowledge is with you. based on what we've read the last 3 or so chapters, I would disagree with that statement, but keep in mind, Elihu believes that he is endowed with the Spirit of God, and that is his ultimate source of wisdom, and that he is more wise than Job or any of the three friends. So, okay, we'll give it to him. We'll let him have that. You don't have to agree with him, but we'll let him have that.
Unless the one he's talking about in perfect knowledge is God.
No, he is talking about himself.
So for sure, okay.
So, we have 2 sections left, and we'll be done with 36, and we'll be done with this evening. So we might run like maybe 5 minutes over. I think we'll just get this done real quick. So who is? So I think it's Renee is next to read, I believe. Can you read for us chapter 36 verses 5 through 10?
Unmute, Renee.
Are you muted still?
Okay.
There we go.
Hello?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
God is mighty, but despises no one. He is mighty and firm in his purpose. He does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their rights. He does not take his eyes off the righteous. He enthrones them with kings and exalts them forever. But if people are bound in chains, held fast by cords of affliction, he tells them what they have done, that they have sinned arrogantly. He makes them listen to correction and commands them to repent of their evil.
All right, thank you. So, yeah, Elihu is giving some good wisdom here. Elihu is saying that God doesn't abandon the righteous. The righteous are enthroned and exalted. Those who are bound, those who are afflicted, God tells them what they've done and corrects them. This is some good wisdom. But if you're Job, this doesn't do anything for you because, again, Job is righteous. And he's not enthroned or exalted right now. He's in the pit of suffering, in the pit of despair. Job is bound by affliction. He is asking God what he has done, and God is not answering him, and his friends are telling him he shouldn't be asking God why he's suffering. So again, Elihu does have some wisdom, but it's kind of a mixed bag. And in the moments where he does actually have some wisdom, it's kind of off base. It's kind of not as helpful as he might think it is. We've got one section left. Kim, could you take verses 16 through 21 of chapter 36?
Mm-hmm. He also lured you out of distress into a broad place where there was no constraint, and what was set on your table was full of fatness. But you are obsessed with the case of the wicked, and judgment and justice seize you. Beware that wrath does not entice you into scoffing, and do not let the greatness of the ransom turn you aside. Will your cry avail to keep you from distress, or will all the force of your strength? Do not long for the night when peoples are cut off in their place. Beware, do not turn to iniquity, because of that you have been tried by affliction.
Okay. I want to lift up verse 21, because this is a big example of, depending on what version of the Bible you're reading, it means two totally different things. So in the NRSV, which I believe is the version Kim just read from, verse 21 Do not turn to iniquity. Because of that, you have been tried by affliction. That suggests that what's happening to Job is happening because he turned to evil. Verse 21 in the NIV, beware of turning to evil, which you seem to prefer to affliction, which suggests that Job would rather be evil than suffer. And those are two completely different things. And the reason I bring this up is if you're reading the NIV or you're reading a version that has this wording, Elihu is telling Job that Job would prefer to be evil rather than suffer. If we go back to chapters 1 and 2, we learn in chapter 1 from God that Job scoffs at evil. And what does the devil say? If you make Job suffer, Job would rather deny you, turn against you, turn to evil than suffer. So here we have Elihu, the one who before he started talking made this big spiel about how his wisdom comes from the Spirit of God, not from age, about how he's the only one that knows what's truly going on, about how his wisdom is so great. And depending on your translation, his words are mirroring those of Satan in the very beginning of the book by saying Job would rather turn to evil than endure suffering. Not looking good for Elihu. That's another strike against him. It's not boding well in his favor. So that's the end of the sections that we highlighted in chapter 36. Like I said, Elihu does kind of bring things around in chapter 37 is much better. The first big part of chapter 37, Elihu's doing a kind of hymn, a type of poem that's all about praising God for God's wonder. And then Elihu concludes the chapter reminding Job, no one's able to stand before God and answer God. Boom, God arrives on the scene. Prepare yourself to try and answer me, I'm gonna question you. So Elihu's place is kind of weird because on the one hand, he is kind of setting the stage for God, literally in chapter 37 by almost introducing God into the scene. But at the same time, if we look at some of his wisdom, some of the stuff he has to say, it almost at times seems like he's speaking against God, contrary to what God's wisdom would say. You know, it's like Elihu sits there for a bunch of chapters listening to Job and the friends talk, and he goes, you know what? I can't stand this anymore. You're all wrong. Here's what's going on. Elihu talks, and it's almost like God stands up and goes, okay, I'm sick of this. You all don't know what you're talking about. Let me tell you what's really going on. So yeah, that was Elihu. Any final thoughts, questions, insights, or anything before we sign off for the night? Okay. Thanks everyone for coming, for the participation. It was a great session. We got through a lot of text and we had some good conversations. And yeah, sorry. Next week, we're gonna pick up right where we left off. We ended today at the end of chapter 37 and chapter 38, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. So that's where we're going to be next week, is we're going to start with God and hear what God has to say after sitting and listening to all of these people talk for 35 straight chapters. We're going to find out what the person who knows what true wisdom is has to say. So that'll be next week. So before we sign off, let's end our session by joining our hearts in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Great. Thanks everyone for being here. Hope to see all of hope to see all of you online next week, and hope to see as many of you as possible at church this weekend.
Peace
Thank
out.
you very much.
Bye.
Take care.
Good night.